So this is joint work with A04, who's a PhD student here at Bonn, my colleague Elena Janis, Bettina Ziflinger, who's at Tilburg, and Christian Simpelmann, who just handed in his PhD here and is now working across the street at the Institute for the Study of Labor, or IZA. So we pretty much have the subset of the questions that Maria talked about initially in this session. So we're going full circle here, although we'll concentrate in this paper on hours of work and hours of care work. So we have data from the Netherlands, and the hours of work we have for the period February to September 2020, and time use we have in November 2019 and April 2020. A little bit of institutional background. So the Netherlands had a relatively mild lockdown in March and April, started opening everything again at the end of April, and daycare and schools were gradually opened after mid-May. And by June, I think all schools pretty much were open. For sure, they were after the summer break. Yeah, so what do we find? So in the month of March and April, women reduce their hours of work by about 1 more hour than men, but that effect vanishes by June. Somewhat surprisingly, for us at least, we don't find any additional effect of children being present in the household on either parent. Yeah. So somehow during these relatively short school closures, parents managed to get by. I'm going to talk a little more about that in the conclusions. And finally, the allocation of additional childcare depends on the hours of work pre-COVID. Yeah, so if both parents were working about equal amounts, so more than 30 hours, then these things increase in roughly equal shares. Maybe men increase childcare hours even a little bit more. For combinations, full-time, part-time, or full-time and no work, generally the gender care gap will increase. That is, women do even more of the care work than men, than before already. Yeah, so our data come from the LIS panel. That's an online panel in the Netherlands. It's a sibling of the Understanding America study in the sense that both derived from the center panel, which Ari set up in the early 90s. And you can actually use the two together. Yeah, if you click on that link or Google for that. So it's a bit smaller than the US. It's about 5,000 households, which translates into 7,500 individuals. And each month, respondents get about 30 minutes of questionnaires. What's really nice about them is that you can link respondents to administrative microdata. Yeah, so in the long run, we will be able to follow people up and see what they've been doing in very detailed microdata in a secure environment, Statistics Netherlands. So we conducted, thanks to the great help of people at Center Data, a set of COVID-19 questionnaires, not tracking like the US, but in different months. And we had some directly after lockdown in March, in the month of April, then in May, when daycare and primary schools started reopening, in June, and again in September. Yeah. From that data, I'll mostly use the hours of work. And then we have 2 time use and consumption questionnaires that build on a module that was fielded last November. And then in April, we pretty much ran the same thing again, but adapted it to the lockdown situation. Yeah, you'll see what I mean by that in a second. And the last email I sent before entering the conference here was actually to the survey manager for the similar questionnaire on time use and consumption, which will go online on Monday. So here you see the hours of work. Yeah, for men, that's blue, and women, that's red. Yeah, and here you see this additional 1 hour decline, which is significant in regressions. In May, they dropped down a little more. That's a bit unfortunate because we hit the vacation period there. And that had a lot to do with that. And then in June and September, they are up, and by now women are actually working more than they did before, and these are unconditional hours, yeah, which are fairly okay to interpret because the OLF out of the labor force and unemployment rates each rose by about 1 percentage point, and there was no difference between men and women. So we think this is the most useful statistic. Let me skip the home hours work from home on the right, not so interesting right here. We see a huge amount of heterogeneity in here. Yeah, so we run a bunch of regressions, which would be far too small in numbers to show here. So let me give you the gist of that. Basically, we run fixed effects regressions that's controlling for all unobserved time constant effect, and then look at how hours of work evolved over the first half year of the COVID-19 crisis by gender and month, and then have a bunch of controls in there.
You have about a minute.
Yeah, I know. I'll run a bit into question time, but I'll have it in mind. Yeah, so women who worked full-time and who were not classified as essential workers actually reduced their hours by 3 more hours than non-essential full-time men. Yeah, so there's a much larger gap. However, of women who are classified as essential workers, yeah, the hours are much better preserved. Yeah, they reduce 1.5 hours less than non-essential men. Yeah, and the gap there is larger than for essential male workers. We have a rich set of controls on the right-hand side. The exact set does not matter. What's alluded to initially, what's really surprising, at least to us, was that when we add gender by month effects with an indicator for whether there are school children at home, there is no change for these people. If anything, their hours, parents' hours are slightly better preserved there. And if we run the regressions, just restricting the sample to these 2-parent families, the other coefficients that I talked about above look pretty much the same. We dig into the time use data. I guess I'll mostly skip that. Yeah, we'll see that here you see on the top, that's the working hours in yellow and commuting hours in dark yellow for men. When they are working full-time, women are not working at all. They reduce a lot, and we added, for example, this category home office plus childcare at the same time. Yeah, and what happens on balance depends a lot on how you treat that. Yeah, so you see here, for example, for full-time, part-time combinations, this is huge how much time men spend in the home office with children, watching children at the same time. At the same time, women do more of the, I would say, hard childcare supervision work, namely the homeschooling. Yeah, so that's a general trend that we see, that men do things on the side and then the women have to do the hard work. So there's a bit of a qualitative difference. Yeah, nevertheless, the main takeaways I would say are that the gender division of tasks is just very heterogeneous. So neither is everybody going back to the gender division of the 1950s, nor do we see here the great equalizer. And if anything, the pre-existing patterns are a bit reinforced, although that depends on how you treat this home office with kids. Yeah, so compared to the what Maria showed earlier, the work hours of women are relatively well preserved here in the Netherlands and generally in Western Europe. And we still try to trace that back, that this is just maybe a consequence of pre-existing institutions, namely that there's highly subsidized daycare with comparably short hours. So people just needed to have a backup plan, which worked for these relatively short school closures of 2 or 3 months. Maybe one thing that's a glimpse of hope for a more equal division of genders here is that, so that if the working from home becomes more accepted also for men, and it becomes less of a hindrance on the career path, then we saw in the time use data that the commuting hours were reduced a lot now. people were in the home office. If that perseveres to some extent, and maybe men, typically fathers, will be working from home, say 2 to 3 days a week, yeah, suddenly they become available for taking care of children or taking care of emergencies, because somebody has to be somewhere in the vicinity when some kid needs to be picked up quicker. All right, that's it. Thank you.